Good morning, everybody. Well, sounded like a teacher then, didn't I? If people could put themselves on mute, that would be really helpful, so we just don't get the kind of background noise. If necessary, Emily Carter from the APPG can mute and unmute you, but ideally you can take charge of your own muting, if that's possible. Stick yourselves on mute. I'm waiting for a couple of people to connect there. Great, we'll get going if that's all right. I think we are still waiting for a few people to join, but we'll get going anyway. Thanks all very much for joining this morning's Greater Manchester APPG. This is part of a series of meetings we've been having looking at the recovery for Greater Manchester, looking at the Build Back Better agenda that Andy and the CA have set out with localities here in Greater Manchester. And we've had some really good sessions so far. Last week we had a really good session on the sort of culture and hospitality sector in Manchester and what we need to do to support that. And that's led to us collectively putting in a submission to the Chancellor about that. And we've got some other meetings coming up in September on transport and travel in the recovery. I think Andy Burnham's joining us for that, and housing in the recovery. And we've got Paul Dennett joining us for that, and I think Andy Burnham as well. So today's meeting is on education, employment and skills. This has come up in all of the conversations we've been having so far. You know, obviously we're going to see some big job losses. We're already starting to see that. And alongside that, some new programs around job creation and so on, and how we kind of link the two when often it's very different demographics. It's obviously often very different demographics of people who with different skills who lose the jobs to the types of jobs that might be being created and so on and so forth. So this is, you know, going to be quite a big challenge. And of course, here in Greater Manchester, we've got some capacity to develop our own agenda around sort of skills and education, but obviously you'll all know that that is limited too, because we don't have all the powers and funding that we like to have. So those who just joined later, we'll just ask you to put yourselves on mute so that we don't hear any background noise. So we've got really varied and interesting panel of speakers who have joined us to talk to us about this agenda, what building back better in Greater Manchester might look like, what are the gaps, what are the opportunities. Thanks, just stick up on mute. And hopefully we can just sort of have, I know it's not ideal on Zoom, is it? Although it often does mean it's easier to attend these things, but it's not always ideal. So we will try and keep it as we have done in previous meetings, as informal as possible. There'll be plenty of time for contributions, comments, discussion from the floor. We've got 5 speakers. So I am going to ask people who are speaking to keep your contributions to around 3 minutes. I know that's a tough ask. When I'm asked to do 3 minutes. But if we can, because then that'll give us plenty of time to have contributions and a discussion around some of those issues as well. So just to let you know who we've got Professor Francesca Gaines, Professor of Public Policy at Manchester University, Joe Purves, who's the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Academic Development at the University of Salford, Richard Caulfield, who's the Northwest Director and Mental Health and Wellbeing Lead for the Association of Colleges, Luke Freeman, who's the Director of FinTech North, and Katie Gallagher, who's the Managing Director of Manchester Digital. So they've all got quite a different perspective of the needs and wants and challenges and opportunities of the skills and education agenda as part of the Build Back Better recovery programme here in Greater Manchester. So without further ado, and then when we get to that point, you can either just put your hand up in the usual way or stick on the chat that you want to come in. So hopefully we'll have about 15-20 minutes of contributions and then we'll open it up. So first of all, Professor Francesca Gaines, or Fran to me, maybe Fran to others as well, just to give us a few minutes of her perspective from Manchester University Public Policy. Thanks, Fran.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lucy, and thanks for the invite. And we've all got our Zoom shirts on this morning, so I'll kick off, not to waste time. Thinking post-COVID, I've got to just refer back to pre-COVID, and I think we were very fortunate in Greater Manchester in that we had a fairly well developed regional vision with a local industrial strategy, strong political leadership, close working between the anchor institutions, the devolution of the adult skills budget, and we were looking to build on our strengths in the region: advanced materials, health innovation, digital industries. So we had a great plan, and at the University of Manchester we felt really connected to and engaged with that plan, and we built in working with research, collaboration and application in Greater Manchester into our vision. Then of course the pandemic came along, and I don't need to go into the huge inequalities that exposed and the hit that sectors are taking, the massive cost and loss of income for local authorities. And I've got to say, for the university too, we have this uncertain future and worry about the future because of the loss of overseas students, and that's exposed a longer term vulnerability in the research funding framework, which is a longer term agenda I think we've got to tackle. We all saw positive changes in lockdown too. Oh, I'm sorry, I should just say, for our graduate students, our wonderful students taking their energy and enthusiasm out to become inspirational teachers, health workers, digital entrepreneurs, you know, this is an uncertain and worrying time. We saw some changes in lockdown, some changes we'd like to capitalise on. So I think there is a vision for the growth that we want in Greater Manchester, which is highly paid skilled jobs across all sectors, building on our strengths, accessible to all and addressing inequalities and working to net zero. So what might be, how can we be resilient? Well, I have two colleagues at Manchester who published a great blog through Policy at Manchester that looked at resilience after the 2008 crash and really point to that need for highly paid skilled jobs, and that we can't rely on the retail and hospitality sectors. So from the university's point of view, we need to look at solving the productivity puzzle, how to get growth, how to achieve skilled jobs, and what you might call lab to market opportunities, so that ideas and discoveries turn into real jobs, and that we have this innovation ecosystem through catapult centres like the Advanced Manufacturing Centre. So we get researchers, business, higher education and FE all working together and building on training across the sectors and across the region. So what might be a risk to achieving a more inclusive economy? And this is where I just want to point to some of the research that I brought together for the Greater Manchester Women and Girls Task Force led by Brenda Warrington, which looks at the sort of gendered nature of local employment. And the fact is that the sectors that are going to be more hit, retail, hospitality, personal and care services, are sectors where women are overrepresented, and the sectors where we can hope to grow highly paid skilled jobs, or where that might be both boosted because of levelling up spending, green growth, construction, manufacturing, STEM and digital sectors. Those are all sectors where men are overrepresented. So this risk to gender inequality is compounded by the problems with childcare. So to achieve a more inclusive growth, and this is my last point, I do think we need an understanding of gender and other inequalities so that we target education and skills training and retraining so that we bring in underrepresented groups and get a greater diversity, both in sectors where there might be innovation and growth, and also in those low paid sectors in the foundational economy where you might be able to use training to boost skills and pay rates. And
thanks very much, Fran. That's really, really helpful. And 3 or 4 minutes goes really quickly, doesn't it? But yeah, I mean, I think your point about the kind of gendered nature and also overrepresentation of Black and ethnic minority communities in many of the jobs at risk versus the types of jobs that might be being created with some of the announcements. It's a strong theme sort of coming through, and I think one that should be very clearly on the table. We're now going to hear from Jo from the University of Salford, Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Academic Development, on some of your thoughts. Jo, thank you.
Thanks very much, Lucy. And I think for us, we have learnt an enormous amount about our student body through this period. And one of the things that we've really had to focus on was digital exclusion, because obviously most universities had to move to online teaching very quickly. And it has become apparent that the digital poverty of our communities is a real barrier. So I mean, at Salford, we've been buying extra laptops just so that people don't have to try and submit assignments on their mobile phones. We have dongles for them because they don't have access to internet at home, or there are many, many people using the same internet and they don't have the speed to be able to deliver. And I think this is something that is going to need addressing for the future. We really need to solve this as an issue because it does exclude communities from becoming socially mobile, accessing the services that they need. And we've had to provide quite a lot of extra hardship funding during this period as well. I think in terms of how we look at the education system for the future, we really are going to have to make a better join up between our FE and HE skills and the technical nature of what we are providing for our students. For us at Salford, this means working very closely with industry about developing more apprenticeship programs, and also looking at that that space just before degree level, the technical skills at level 5, which we know that there is a gap and that employers want people educated to level 5, but not quite to degree level in particular technical areas. So we're already working with employers such as Siemens and TalkTalk on those sorts of digital STEM-based, very practically focused, but higher education courses, because universities do have access to more advanced STEM kit than FE colleges, and we are able to use that and capitalise on that. But what we want to see is a very close flow through from technical skills in FE. I think also with the arts and creative industries, we've seen that they are very vulnerable in situations like this, and it's about, obviously at Salford we have the Media City campus, it's about making sure that all of arts and creative students have digital skills as well, so that they are able to capitalise on what they do creatively through digital media and be able to make that work for them in terms of the jobs that are available. So really, I think in terms of building back better, I would entirely agree about the capitalising on AMRC and looking at the research and business and enterprise and SME link up. We're certainly looking at how we help SMEs to become more resilient after this, and also at what we can do in terms of the government is talking about a big construction boom. We need to make sure that is sustainable. It is green, sustainable construction and smart construction as well, looking at modern methods, looking at retrofit to make our buildings appropriate for the people that they serve, and making sure that we really don't throw away the potential for, I think we've all learned that there can be a greener, more sustainable way of living, and that we don't throw that away in the big construction boom that we are expecting now. Thanks very much, Lucy.
Thanks, Jo. That's really, really interesting. And yeah, I think that issue around the sort of digital divide that we've really seen, exposed in this virus, and how you tackle that's really interesting. Okay, so now we're going to hear, we've heard from the sort of university side of things. We're now going to hear from the FE side of things, with Richard Caulfield from the Association of Colleges, which represents all sixth form colleges and all the FE colleges across the country. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Lucy. And I think just going into the COVID situation, I think we ought to pay tribute to all those school and college leaders actually who switched to online so rapidly at an amazing pace. The Greater Manchester, just the GFEs in Greater Manchester, the General Further Education Colleges, 70,000 learners online after, with a week's notice really was quite an incredible effort. But I think that digital poverty point that has been made is absolutely crucial if we are going to keep people engaged in their learning. That's young people and adults as well. We have focused a lot on young people in that, but adult learning as well, it's really important. And it's not just about the technology sometimes, it will be the housing conditions and the likes that people live in. I'm privileged enough to sit in a spare room here, able to engage and take part in things like this. If I'm living in shared accommodation, if I'm living in crammed accommodation, I cannot find the time and space to access these things digitally that others can. So it goes just beyond the digital to an extent about the ability to engage in that way. But we've done it very successfully, I think. I think we had a clear plan for a skills-led recovery that we've been talking to government about, and there's a very much a Greater Manchester angle that can be taken on that. So how do we retain our young people in education? How do we ensure the transition next year into colleges, those that are leaving school this year? There's a real problem then. We've got to make sure that we don't see too many NEETs, that we do all the work we can over the summer. Some of these young people will not have been engaged since March, and we need to ensure that they're picking up their places in September. And that has a live issue around transport actually for all of us as well, because there's one thing making colleges open and fit for purpose and the likes, but if young people can't get there, if we've got transport issues, and there's a real transport challenge about the capacity of the system early next year that could impact upon NEETs or non-attendance and the likes. We wanted to see some ability, and the government have provided some investment in 18 to 19-year-olds staying on. So actually seeing some value in maybe progressing, maybe it might be level 2, level 3 progression for some, but also thinking about what that progressions to level 4 and 5 that was spoken about earlier as well, and where that can be done. So some people might use the next year to pick up additional skills to come into this to the workplace at a higher level. I think there are some good government initiatives that I think we should sort of welcome, the Kickstarter traineeships and likes, but we've got to really work out how the narrative works for that. I think it can be very confusing for our employers and for young people about which initiative, which route, which journey am I taking. So I think that brings advice and guidance really to the forefront. So I think we've really got to build on capacity in colleges, within Job Centre Plus and the likes, to make sure that we've got advice and guidance sorted over the next year to really help people navigate the systems and make sure that they're engaged where they can. Also, I think that a couple of things that have been missing hugely from government initiative is what the focus on adults. And as you said, Lucy, we've got devolved adult education budget, but there's a National Skills Fund coming through next year. There's a potential for a risk of initiative-itis appearing with too many initiatives coming through, and that adult budget blended into one, devolved down to Greater Manchester level and allowing us to have the initiatives that allow short courses, allow us to blend to make sure that we can get people into work quickly and retrain for the sectors, for the recoverable sectors and the key worker sectors, I think. So digital, construction, health and social care and environment, we have a focus on them things, helping people at all levels getting into them areas. But as I say, I think there's a real big issue. And I think the Education Skills Advisory panel that Greater Manchester convenes is a really useful forum, meets fortnightly at the moment, just to focus on some of them key issues, to develop a young person's offer, to think about the skills for adults, how we pick up people who have been made redundant and allow them to retrain, reskill quickly into other places of work that are, as I say, in those recoverable sectors and key worker areas. And the colleges are collaborating really closely to make sure that we have a coherent offer across Greater Manchester to help that happen.
Thanks very much, Richard. Yeah, that's really helpful, and I think your point about initiativitis is very well made. One of my particular bugbears that government sort of sees to do, rather than giving devolution in a holistic way, so that these decisions can be made more strategically in a place-based way, which I think is part of what we're trying to get at today. And yeah, as a parent of one of those 16-year-olds who've had literally no purpose in life since March, I think the issue around summer transition is a very, very pertinent one, an important one. Okay, so we're now going to move slightly to, I suppose, more the kind of employer end of things a little bit, or the industry end of things. From hearing from Luke Freeman and Katie Gallagher. Luke first, who's the director of FinTech in the North. Perhaps you could explain. I'm not going to try and explain what FinTech is, Luke. I think I do know, but I'll leave it to you to just quickly explain what you do and how you're working in Greater Manchester on the sort of Build Back Better agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. So, morning everybody. FinTech, very simply, is the application of technology, mainly digital tech, in financial services. FinTech is a sort of sector in its own right, and Manchester is one of the leading locations for that activity in the UK. Outside London, the UK as a whole is a world leader in that sector. FinTech North is a events-based program. We run seminars, full-day conferences, etc. And it's just a means of kind of getting the community that works in that sector together on a regular basis. It includes the entrepreneurs who are setting up these businesses, the advisory community that support them, including investors. And also some of the incumbents in financial services, the big banks, insurance companies, etc., who often end up being the main sort of customers, the business-to-business customers of these FinTech businesses. There's nothing unique about FinTech in respect of the kinds of skills they're looking for. FinTech businesses are quite a good proxy for the broader digital and tech community. And when we look at COVID, there are probably two major things at play, I think, that we see. One being the sort of massive acceleration of the digitization of the economy. So I don't think that COVID has led to any major difference or kind of change in direction of what was happening anyway, but it's massively accelerated that. So a kind of trivial example is what we're all doing today. We're all on Zoom. I expect all of us, our use of Zoom and MS Teams and other platforms has gone up, incredibly over the last few months. That probably was going to happen anyway, but it probably was going to happen over a 5, 7, 10-year period. And instead it's happened in the space of 3 months. And the same's true of all sorts of different digital tools, workflow, automation tools that help us collaborate with people that we're working together with, tools that help businesses promote their services, onboard clients, provide services to those clients. And so there are some implications about the sectors of the economy that are more likely to grow and less likely to grow as a consequence of that, which I'll come on to. The second thing that's at play, we've touched on a little bit already this morning, which is the generation of people who are either in education or currently making choices about the education they want, and the massive disruption that they've experienced either to what they're actually, to the way they're learning today, and their expectations about how they want to learn in the future. So my sense is that there's a much more informed set of choices being made now and about to be made about the value that those prospective students expect to get and think they will get from different forms of education. There's much less of a well, I'll just kind of go through a traditional FE, HE thing, not quite sure where it's going to lead, but there'll be value in me getting a degree or a postgraduate qualification, and much more focus on what's the value I'm actually going to get from this thing. And I'll talk a little bit in a second about how I think those two things come together. Back to the acceleration of the digitalisation of the economy, there are some core skills, therefore, which are in demand in those sectors of the economy which are likely to benefit and grow from that. And it's the kind of things you'd expect. There's nothing surprising here. Core coding, programming skills for web development and app development. The skills required to create really good user interface. So that user experience is a key differentiating point between different providers. Certain types of methodology. So there's a particular type of program management methodology that works really well in digital environments. Something called Agile and Scrum, which is a different set of skills. Data science and data analytics skills. And then when we think about the increased use of digital technology, it brings risks with it around cybercrime. And so the skills required to defend businesses and their customers from cybercrime also become really important. All of these skills were already scarce before COVID, and the risk for Greater Manchester is that the potential for growth in those sectors. One of the key constraints on that growth is the availability of people with those skills. So when you combine that with what I was saying about education, it feels as though there's a real opportunity. There's a receptive audience out there of both young people, but also people who may have lost their jobs in traditional sectors who are open to retraining, to have their eyes opened to the opportunity for them of getting some very vocational based skills in those core digital skills. And so I guess the question for this group is, what's stopping measures being taken to make Greater Manchester the leading place, or one of the leading places in the UK for the provision of courses that enable people, college leavers, HE leavers and retrainers, to be absolutely kind of work ready for those digital skills. That's probably all I have to say.
That's brilliant, Luke. Thank you. And that's a very good challenge to set. And I think also potentially with things like GCHQ coming up here and so on, there are, have I said that right? Yeah. There are opportunities for us, and there should be opportunities for us. So I think that is the right challenge to set. Okay, last but by no means least, we're going to hear from Katie Gallagher, who's the Managing Director of Manchester Digital, which supports kind of the digital economy in Manchester, bringing in investment and supporting businesses. Is that right, Katie? Maybe you can say Manchester Digital is better than I can.
Thanks, Lucy. So we do a lot of those things, but actually, and luckily, given that I've been asked to join this meeting, we spent a huge amount of time looking at the digital skills issue. And as Luke has said, obviously there's been pre-COVID, the industry suffered from an acute skills shortage, which actually was so severe it was impacting most companies' growth. When we looked at vacancies pre-COVID, we had a 33% digital and tech vacancy gap. So that was a lot of companies who had open vacancies that they just couldn't fill. Post-COVID, I mean, actually, just to say, one of the things, and I will come back to this, one of the things that having a severe skills shortage did that was actually quite helpful, as Fran alluded to, our sector is not diverse. It has a very poor gender balance. and it's also quite bad at creating opportunities for people from all kinds of diverse backgrounds and different ethnicities. But having a severe skills shortage meant that employers went and looked in unusual places to find their talent. So whether that was going to look at boot camps, whether that was hiring from apprenticeships, a lot of employers used apprenticeships specifically as a route to improving the diversity in their businesses, and obviously looking at retraining things and giving people opportunities that they might not have had. One thing that I just want to make very, very clear before I say other things is what employers say they will do and what employers actually do are very, very different. And that is especially true of when it comes to skills and the investment that they will put into their people. So post-COVID, we've got a nuanced picture. So, and also the last 3 months, obviously that data doesn't really give us anything meaningful about what the future looks like in terms of employment. So businesses that have done well during COVID may not necessarily do as well during a period of economic uncertainty. And people keep asking me to tell them a sector that is doing really well. So is e-commerce doing really well? Is FinTech doing really well? And it's really hard to do that because there are obviously parts of each of those sectors that are doing well and not doing well. So if you look at companies like Booking.com and Auto Trader, who are both massive employers in Greater Manchester, their markets have, to all intents and purposes, travel and buying cars flatlined during COVID. And again, during a recession, those markets are always impacted. So I think what we will see overall is a reshuffling of the decks, but due to that acceleration of digitisation that Luke talked about, we will see slower and steadier growth. And it may be that some of the companies that have been the leading stars in Manchester and growing exponentially, that will slow. Companies, obviously, we have a big public sector digital industry here. So as well as GCHQ, we have DFE, we have bits of DWP. So there's some solid employment there. And again, we have lots of disruptive startups and smaller companies who are still projecting growth, still recruiting. So there is a lot to be positive about. I think one of the things that I wanted to touch on was the inclusion, the digital inclusion piece. When we talk about digital skills, that is incredibly broad. And, you know, if we're moving to a world where everything is digitized and everybody needs digital skills, there are layers of those. And I think for government to really understand that and develop appropriate interventions and responses is really, really important. So, I mean, obviously there are digital life skills, so the basics of people being able to pay things online, being able to bank online, those kind of things. And obviously there are issues around digital divide, you know, access to Wi-Fi, access to kit. But from a Manchester digital perspective and from an employer perspective, we're obviously interested in users of technology, so where there's a level of proficiency. We're then interested in technical capability, so people who can understand and exploit digital adoption and those tools and platforms. And then at the very top level, we're interested in the capability to build technology and obviously to create those innovative and disruptive products. And the pathways to all those four things are still not particularly clear. So when we talk about emerging technologies, when we talk about AI, when we talk about data science and all the scary robot things that are coming to steal our jobs, they are still very, very much seen as PhD university pathway skills. And I think we need to kind of understand is, if we're talking about inclusivity and giving other people those opportunities, how do they get started? And, you know, where are the clear pathways to those? And again, some of those things, there's a lot of those things that just come from a basic computer science degree or a computer science education. But there are not enough people from diverse enough backgrounds coming through that route to actually make sure that when we have highly manipulated products coming out of the other end, that they are actually going to help perpetuate inclusive and progressive societies. I'm not going to go into all the challenges around AI because that is obviously an entirely different thing. But to come back to what I was saying before about what employers say they will do and what they do, we know from running a digital skills audit every single year that employers still kind of resort to type. The bulk of their new entry talent comes from graduates, it comes from computer science grads, and the amount of apprentices they take are very, very limited. And again, when you look at the size differentiation, corporates and large companies will take apprentices. When you look at smaller digital and tech companies, which make up the majority of the industry, it's a lot rarer to see them take apprentices. And I think there are some truths behind apprenticeships for companies that government doesn't necessarily acknowledge. If you take an apprentice, you are taking someone obviously with generally 3 years less life experience, or somebody who has come through a very different path than a graduate. And there is a dip in productivity. There's a different dip in productivity in taking on an apprentice than there is a graduate. And companies have tried and tested graduate schemes that they are very comfortable running. They kind of know what they're getting out the back of a 3-year computer science degree. It's a very different picture with apprentices. And a lot of smaller companies just aren't set up to support apprentices. So even if they take them, quite often it can be a difficult journey. So from my perspective, I think there's work to do with employers to make sure that they view apprenticeships more favourably. I don't think the government thing of giving companies an extra £2,000 is going to make an employer take an apprentice. And in our industry, if £2,000 is the difference between an employer taking an apprentice or not, then they probably shouldn't be taking that apprentice in the first place, because the reasoning behind it is probably wrong. So I think, so my kind of main concern and the thought I want to leave you with is, whilst the economy slows down and digital and technology recruitment slows, it's really, really important that we don't lose the good work that's been done in Greater Manchester on helping technology companies employ more diversely and think about different backgrounds, and not let employers just go back to taking graduates from the same courses and the same route. And also, we know that employers, at least for this year, are vastly reducing the number of early talent vacancies that they're hiring for. So big companies are halving grad schemes, they're cancelling apprentices altogether. So unless we think of a way of making sure that we keep that talent coming through, when the economy bounces back in 2 or 3 years, we will be straight back where we were in terms of skills shortage. I apologise, that was a bit rambling, but I've got...
No, it wasn't at all. That wasn't at all, Katie. It was very, very informative and thought-provoking, actually. And I think, the idea that we do have this sort of big skills shortage, yet there's a real gap between how that's and a bit more creative thinking about filling that skill shortage, is exactly the right challenge to put to us. And I think it is a shame really that the PhD pathway and the graduate pathway, because a lot of the skills that you're talking about could be developed and are developed sort of elsewhere as well. Someone recently told me that the half-life of a computer science degree was 18 months anyway. So it's constant reskilling in your sector, isn't it, really? Because it's so much, it's changing so quickly, that really you would think there'd be a bit more at the cutting edge of developing that ongoing skills development. So that's really interesting. Okay, so we've got about half an hour or so for discussion, comments, thoughts, ideas you want to throw in, what you might be doing in your sector, your place of work or whatever. I'll pick on a few people if no one's going to put that. I can see most people. Afsal, do you want to come in? You need to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
There we go. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
I think somebody from my staff has now joined in as well. I've got to leave, so I want to give my apology. I just want to thank actually everyone who contributed. For me, I think, yeah, it's clear that we need to be coordinating more, particularly in education establishments and the workplace, so make sure that we're fit for the purpose. And secondly, I think I agree, this whole change, it's been pretty fast, but this has really accelerated at another level for all of us. And how we manage that change itself is also important. And added to that is general, the gap in inequality which exists in Manchester. I mean, over the last 15, 20 years, we have seen Manchester actually progressing and becoming a really world-class city. But we can't say that has actually meant that it's gone down to the grassroots level with the people themselves. We have so many wards within the 32 who are 10% of the most deprived. So giving those young people the hope, opportunity when they're going to be hit with this huge thing, what has happened with COVID-19 and the economic impact, I think is so crucial. So thank you to you as well, Lucy, for actually pulling all this together. I think we need to continue doing this, to talking together, and so we can sort of bring this path clarity in it. So thank you for that.
Thanks very much, Afzal. Well, all credit goes to Jill and Emily and her team. I just come along and take the credit on the day. But yeah, we you know, I think these discussions we've been having, I found, you know, incredibly helpful and informative, and hopefully they will help to shape things across Greater Manchester. So if you want to ask a question, anybody, or have a comment, just either put your hand in the air.
Lucy, can I start?
Yes, go for it, Graham.
Yeah, I'm Graham Woodworth. I work with Joe Walby, the CEO of the Mustard Tree, Manchester. I was very encouraged to hear about a few things, but we have been very agile in COVID. We've remained open in Manchester, supporting people combating poverty and preventing homelessness, as you're aware. But we had to be very agile in restructuring what we would support. So it's good to hear around digital poverty. I like that word, it's a brilliant word, but I think what we're trying to do is combat that in a way that is very very agile. We're also concerned about the volume of attendees coming in present, so that's one area of concern. We will only be taking 60, not 200 work placements this year because of COVID, which is a massive drop. But we have looked at supporting the existing clients online. So we've really gone online. We've gone online in 2 weeks with all our freedom support offer to try and get people, you know, towards that work placement within Manchester. Really interesting to hear quite a lot of those methods and quite a lot of takeaway around digital and inclusion. And it's something we're really looking at right now for people. And I like the idea of the layers and the various life skills and digital divide. And diversity. You know, we have a lot of asylum seekers and refugees that we support. So we're really interested in developing something digitally for those people and working with, obviously, your organisations to ensure that we give the best for people in this place. So really encouraged. Got a lot from this discussion, but very interested in you know, developing the thinking.
Richard's declaring an interest as a Mustard Tree trustee. Yeah, well, Mustard Tree, I'm a regular donor to Mustard Tree as well. Fantastic charity in my constituency, working with the homeless. And you know, I think to hear that you move digitally as well is really interesting too. And you know, on one level, we always thought that kind of the digital evolution would be a great leveler. But I think sort of what we're hearing today is it's been the opposite of that in many ways. And I think that's really shame because, you know, everybody, you know, well, not everybody, but a lot of people do have smartphones and access to the world through their phones these days. It should be a leveler, but it's clearly not becoming so. Did you want to come back in, Richard?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that sort of naturally we've got a real focus on young people. We have a focus on people dropping out of the labour market, but those people who were struggling before COVID, who, you know, those communities that really struggle and finding ways to reach down and help them is going to be a real challenge as well. So we mustn't forget the type of work Mustard Tree are doing. Those people are further, some of the people who access our services are so far away from the labour market that bringing them in and developing them skills to be able to even access some of the skills training that we're talking about is vital work, and we mustn't let that slip. You know, and actually, you know, one of the things that troubles me as a trustee sometimes is our skills training has often been in retail and in hospitality, and those are areas that are going to be massively hit. So we've got to think about how we develop their skills so they can access workplace to get themselves out of poverty and make a difference. So we have different segmented parts of the community that we need to think of our offer to in order to really make sure we do build back better.
No, I completely agree, Richard. I mean, that came through in our conversation last week around hospitality as well. You know, that hospitality is a great entry sector. You know, it's a low entry. They take a huge number of apprenticeships, a huge number of people, sort of easy entry. And with the significant sort of retreat in hospitality and the crisis in hospitality, you know, where are those entry sort of level jobs going to come from? And I think what we're hearing today is that other sectors that hitherto have, you know, pitched a lot higher than that are going to have to help be part of that. I've got Councillor Walsh, who I can only just see the top of your head there, Councillor Walsh.
Listen, Lucy, you don't want to see any more than the top of my head. No, thanks a lot, Lucy. I think we've got an opportunity here to actually look at the curriculum within schools. We're all talking about digital poverty. I've been around for too many years. I've been in education for 50 odd years, and we've been battling this poverty of literacy. All we're supplanting now is literary poverty for digital poverty. And what I want to establish is that in our schools, we haven't got an education system, we've got a factory system. In the 1980 Education Act, it said education should meet the needs of all learners. Now, at the moment, that doesn't happen. And so I think we've got a great opportunity in Greater Manchester to remodel and reshape our curriculum in schools to meet the new now. And I'd love to say, Lucy, we need to do that, and we need to do it quickly. Okay?
Yes, thank you. That's I strongly agree with that in terms of a broad curriculum, and it's the opposite direction of travel that we're sort of going in. And you know, to meet the skills agenda of the future, there do need to be on offer the sort of creative subjects, the computer science subjects, and all of these sort of through school as well. So that's something that I think hopefully we might have Kate Green joining us shortly, who's recently been appointed the Shadow Education Secretary for Labour. So I've got anybody else who wants to come in? Yep, Sandra Coling, I can see you putting your hand up. If you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you.
Just say who you are and
yeah. So hello everyone. I'm Sandra Coling. I'm work for Stockport Homes, but I'm the chair of the Greater Manchester Housing Providers Group that looks at employment, and I've got a few of our members here today as well. So it's been a really good session, and actually so a lot of the discussion you've had today we've discussed at our meetings. So if you go to pre-COVID, what we've been looking at is trying to get people into better jobs. A lot of our tenants, like what Lucy's just said about a lot of entry jobs, and we have a great offer. A lot of us have a great offer about getting people into those entry jobs. But we were actually trying to focus on coming together as a group to try to get our tenants into sort of get them out of poverty in the longer term. And actually, digital was one of those areas that we identified that we felt we felt was a niche at the time, that we could maybe get some of our customers into those jobs. So it's really interesting to hear what Luke and Kate in particular said, because I suppose the question for me is, so we've got a group of 27 housing providers, so we're big employers as a sector, but also the amount of tenants that we have access to. And I suppose what we want to try to say is how can we use that leverage and our connections with our customers to actually get people into these high demand jobs and high paid jobs, and actually really get them out of poverty. And I too like that word, digital poverty. I'm sure I'll use that again. But it's been really enlightening and really valuable today. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. I don't know, Katie, do you want to come back on that? There's a good bit of networking going on here with you, Katie.
There is, isn't there? So again, I mean, you'd think apprenticeships are a solution to that on the surface, but probably some of your tenants would need to look at traineeships and things before that. But I think it's actually it's about building those networks with employers, because the problem is if you're training people, it's getting employers to understand the value and kind of meet you halfway, because obviously those people need a different kind of support. And this is where we found employers have fallen down with apprentices in the past. They haven't been prepared for some of the social issues that come with employing those people. And if you're a smaller company, you don't necessarily have you might not have an HR team, you don't necessarily have that kind of level of support. So actually creating a way, or having almost like maybe a central resource that can help support those companies and those people, might actually aid and bridge some of that employment gap. I just wanted to say something as well in terms of Councillor Walsh and the curriculum. We've had issues with the curriculum for ages, and there is a real problem that education suffers from short-term thinking. And you know, we have a computer science GCSE, but nobody wants to do it because it's deadly dull, and it's taught in a way that doesn't necessarily make computing look really exciting. And there is also, to play to a point Richard made earlier about careers advice and guidance, we have a terrible habit of making up job titles in our industry. And so actually, if you are somebody in a school looking at a computer, so that, you know, being faced with tech choices, and probably at any point in your career, and then you hear about jobs like user experience, or you know, and Google Analytics or Crow managers, that's not going to mean anything to anybody. And until we can actually get some standardization and some of that terminology used at an education level and a reskilling and retraining level, we're never going to join the pieces and make sort of some of those meaningful opportunities happen.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, as said 16-year-old in this house who's very mathematical and very tech savvy and creative and wants to be an engineer, absolutely hated the computer science GCSE. It's been like pulling teeth. But I mean, yeah, I think the curriculum issue is a real passion of mine as well. Okay, I've got someone called Galaxy A20. I don't know what your name is. Perhaps you could just say with your hand up if you say who you are. Galaxy A20, that's you. Yeah.
Yeah, Craig from Great Places Housing Group. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Yeah. It was more about the, I think the advice and guidance, totally agree with that, and the labour market information as well. I think sometimes it's a little bit sketchy in terms of what the opportunities actually are, and to be able to articulate that to young people and adults alike, those that are returning to the labour market retrainers, to actually say what the jobs are and where they are, rather than saying we've got a shortage, but we're never that clear, you know, where the shortage is. Is that in the northeast? Is it in the northwest? Is it in North Manchester even? So to be able to have that clarity in terms of what the jobs actually are, how many there are, where they exist, I think is really crucial, because that then starts to inform the education. I think young people really find it difficult to have that correlation between what they're studying and then what the job might be in the future. So I just think the labour market information is absolutely critical.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, completely sort of agree with that. Elizabeth, standing, somebody called Alice E. Could you put yourself on mute? And Craig, you could perhaps go on back on mute now as well. Thanks. Elizabeth Stanley, I'll bring you in.
Thank you. I'm a parent carer. I have a 17-year-old who has severe learning difficulties. I also have a social enterprise that supports families of children with disabilities and special educational needs. It's a couple of questions, really. I've been really interested in the life journey of children with disabilities and special needs. And in Greater Manchester, we have 24,000 children with education, health and care plans. And their outcomes across Greater Manchester are actually worse than the national average. My questions really are the impact of lockdown on children with special needs, especially in their therapies. So my own daughter, for example, has had no physio, no occupational therapy, no speech and language therapy for 6 months. Well, she will have done by the time we get to September. And my question really, I think, or something to consider, is if we have to lock down again and schools closed, what will we do to support those children and families better? Because there will be families out there whose parents have lost their jobs, who are now struggling to get food and are struggling to manage generally. So is there some sort of planning that could be done at a Greater Manchester level to make sure that children and young people who do have special needs and disabilities and their families and parents and carers what is there that we can do as a collective group of people passionate about children and young people and employment and education? Is there something that we can do differently should we have to go through this again?
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. I'm not sure that any of our panelists have sort of got maybe well placed to respond to that, but it is something I've raised directly with Andy Burnham and been talking to the CA about. I mean, I think for vulnerable children, particularly the disadvantage gap, the early years, I lead with Andy Burnham on the early years school readiness agenda and the gap there that we have in Greater Manchester in school readiness. I mean, all of those agendas are going to be set back 5-10 years, I think, by this lockdown. And I think, you know, the thing that I've been talking to Andy about is what's the Greater Manchester response to that? How are we all going to come together and galvanise a real effort to make sure that that we don't lose a whole generation of young people who've suffered disproportionately and more greatly from having essentially, as you say, sort of 6 months out of school. And we all know that for some, you know, for some teenagers potentially, for some vulnerable children, for others, you know, that's going to be a life-changing period of time that they may never get back from. So yeah, perhaps I can link you in with a combined authority, sort of lead on those issues, Elizabeth, and be good to get your thoughts in on that. Is there anyone else who wants to come in with a question or comment or anything? Michael, do you want to say anything from an MMU point of view? I'm putting you on the spot there. Unmute yourself, maybe.
No, I completely take on board a lot of the points, particularly that Katie was making about the difficulty of getting small employers over the line in compliance with apprenticeships. Our degree apprenticeships, we're really proud of. It's a great exemplar of the university being nimble and agile and working with employers. But because of the way the levy system's set up, most of the participatory organisations involved are large employers. We do have a number of SMEs that work on it, and we've commissioned a piece of work to look at how we can have a better offer that's more closely linked with the needs of SMEs in Greater Manchester, but with the much bigger purpose of providing opportunities for young people in Greater Manchester. A lot of our students do come from within 40 miles of the city. And I think COVID's going to focus a lot of our attention on finding opportunities for them. And I think all of us have got a responsibility to dig deep and think about how we can help people through what's going to be a very tough economic climate emerging out of COVID.
Absolutely. No, thanks, Michael. And yeah, MMU does you really are leading the way on degree apprenticeships. And I think you're right, and it's come through from what Katie and Richard and others have said earlier. I think that there's too much of a straitjacket around some of these things sometimes, isn't there? And you know, I think we need, you know, if a time like this doesn't demand us to be a bit more creative and you know, think differently about how apprenticeships and other traineeships even can be delivered, especially when you're talking about small businesses who perhaps don't want someone full-time for 6 months of the year, but could accommodate somebody part-time for a different period or something. You know, I think we should be looking at all those approaches. Do any of our panelists have any sort of final thoughts before we sort of wrap up? Luke, I'll bring you in, and then Richard and Fran as well. Yeah, and then we'll wrap up. So Luke, Richard, and
yeah, it's just to endorse some of the comments that were made about how opaque the job market can seem to particularly to young people who got just a bewildering array of choices and pressures on them from all sorts of different backgrounds. And I completely agree. There's a job that that employers can do to market more clearly the opportunity and communicate that in a very kind of clear way. I think there is a role for educators as well to promote the benefit of some of those courses and some of those skills, and to do that in a way which is really kind of talking about the benefit of the work that qualification will enable you to do. It's very, you know, there's merit in learning for learning's sake, without doubt. But I think on the stuff we're talking about today, a number of those skills and those courses are or should be a means to an end, and that end should be, you know, interesting, fulfilling, and well paid jobs, which employers are crying out for people with those skills. So just to agree, there's a job to be done to get that communication really well lined up and communicate the excitement and the opportunity, rather than it sounding dull and difficult.
Definitely, and I think what it takes as well is, you know, is often people in the education sector to understand those jobs themselves, which many of them won't have experience of. Richard, to you, and then Fran for last word.
Yeah, I noticed, I was watching this morning back a video about some of the colleges' works with the Careers and Enterprise Company, and Manchester College won a Beacon Award this year for their work on careers. And colleges like Manchester got some great employer partnerships where they've got a group of employers working with the curriculum teams to develop a curriculum that is right for their students, and then taking them on work placements, a sort of sector work-based academy model where students are going out on regular placements and guaranteed interviews at the end of it with companies. So I think there's a real place for co-design between colleges, universities and employers, that people can step into that space. It will be great. And I think also just to think about the displacement, I do worry that apprenticeships becomes a golden bullet in a sort of, people think that's the answer to everything, and there is more than apprenticeships out there. We mustn't denigrate sort of the value of class-based learning for many. And also we will see people displaced. If we have, if the traineeship programme is a success, then we might see displacement of opportunities maybe for supported internships and the type of SEN opportunities for students, special needs opportunities there. So we need to think about where we invest there to provide maybe more space in education or other places, so that we are able to support all sectors of the community. I think we, like Graham was talking about earlier, you know, that segmentation, different people impacted in different ways, and we will need, whilst we need to prioritise young people at this moment, I think because of how they've been impacted, I think we need to think more broadly and think about how we bring in older workers, people with high needs, and how we get the support to them too.
Thanks, Richard. It's really helpful. And Fran, finally to you.
Only just to say what a great conversation, and I've really enjoyed hearing from the other panelists and you all. And you know, I think that is what Greater Manchester does so well, isn't it? Join up, and that's what we need to do, is join up, HEFE, public, private, to get those innovation ecosystems going with an awareness of diversity. And so if there's one thing I would say, is childcare is absolutely key to underpin all of this. But what a good conversation, and great to hear.
Thanks, Fran. Yeah, we didn't really touch on childcare, but it's very, it is a very important thing. I'm not sure how people are sort of supposed to go back to work when they've still got kids kicking around, as I do at the moment. But anyway, managed to keep them quiet for a bit. So can I thank you all very much? I thought that was really helpful. Jill and I will have a follow-up and see if there's some actions that we can take forward as an APPG sort of coming out of that, because our role as an all-party parliamentary group is not just to have very interesting discussions, which we are doing now, but actually turn those into action plans and to inform parliamentarians and others so that we can kind of be raising the right issues nationally and locally with the combined authority. So thanks to Jill and Emily and Jill's team for arranging this. Thank you all for coming on. Just a final notice, we've got our next meeting, which is part of our recovery series on transport and travel, and that's on Friday the 18th of September from 11 o'clock, and that's with Andy Burnham. So watch out for the Zoom notice of that, because I think we'll still be in Zoom mode in September, I would think. In fact, I'm not sure I'm ever going to come off Zoom mode. It's far more productive than travelling to London half the week. So thanks very much. Thanks all for coming. Bye now.